Vincent, we are now live.
So Chair Hutt, we can start the meeting.
Okay, great. I will call to order the Sierra Madre Planning Commission meeting of Thursday, July 16th. Do we have a roll call?
Chair Hutt,
Here.
Vice Chair Dennison,
Present.
Commissioners Catalano, Gallus, Pevsner, and Spears.
Present.
Okay, did we hear Bill?
Now I can't hear Bill.
Okay, I see him on the list, but
Yeah.
his audio is not coming through.
Yeah, it was a minute ago. You may want to check your audio, Bill.
I think he's saying he can hear us, but I'm not sure Bill, we cannot hear you.
Right.
Still can't hear you.
I heard him just a minute ago.
No.
Stand by, sir. Let me see if I can mute and unmute you. Just give me a second.
Okay. I think we're going to have to start our meetings at 6:30 to make sure everything is working and everybody gets a chance to log in.
And give Oscar time to drive around everybody's home.
Fair enough. No audio. Sorry, sir. No audio yet.
The headset always works. Get the headset.
Yeah. He's going to go get the headset.
This may be why the children aren't doing well in virtual learning. I'm
Oh
told
no,
that
the children are far better at this than we are.
I'm told that the first thing that the teacher does is mute all the kids.
And Jen, we did hear from Bill Pevsner. I mean, Joe Catalano.
Yeah, you said you would be here tonight.
Okay. So we do have a quorum. We are correcting some audio issues with Commissioner Pevsner. And let's see if that takes care of it here.
Testing.
We can hear you. Very good.
All right.
I need a hint on how to use this, this whole Zoom mute thing. Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, great. That means we have a quorum and we can go on. First item of agenda on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion for that?
Also move.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously. Next, we'll move on to rotation of chair and vice chair to serve for the term July 2020 to June 2021. And I think it's traditional that I start off by nominating the chair, and I nominate Tom.
I'll second the nomination.
Any discussion, or we're just going to vote? Good. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that's great. Welcome to the chair, Tom. Next is vice chair. Do we have any nominations?
I think, are we allowed to nominate people not here?
But that's the special thing you do.
I nominate Commissioner Catalano to vice chair.
That sounds good to me. I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
All right.
Welcome
That sounds
aboard,
great.
Joe.
Now, Tom, I'm handing the meeting over to you.
All right, next on the list is approval of minutes of July 2nd, 2020. Deputy City Attorney, there's only two of us that won't recuse ourselves for these minutes. Are we able to vote on it, or do we need to continue this?
Oh, we'll have to continue it then. We'll need the majority.
All right, I move we continue the approval of these minutes to the next meeting.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Carries. Move to the next meeting. Next will be the council liaison report. Mayor Capocha, would you like to speak?
You have to unmute yourself, please. Yeah. There you go.
I don't have anything to report other than John Harabedian and I have both stated that we will not be seeking a third term for city council. So that's the big news. That's it.
Thank you for your report. Next, we will allow for community input. At this time, any person may address the Planning Commission concerning an item that is not on the agenda. The commission welcomes your attendance and participation. When addressing the commission, please begin by providing, sorry, while I'm doing this, can we put up the phone number for people?
Yes, Claire Lynn is going to be putting that up on the screen shortly.
Vincent, you need to allow me to share the
Yes,
screen.
there we go. Yes. 1 second.
As she's doing that, I will slowly continue to read this.
Vince, I got it. You should be able to.
The commission welcomes your attendance and participation. When addressing the commission, please begin by providing your name and address for the record. Please keep comments to no more than 5 minutes to assure an orderly and timely meeting. Copies of the agenda are available for your convenience at the rear. Just kidding. State legislation limits the commission's ability to take action on specific requests. Government Code Section 54954.2 limits the placement of items on the agenda for action 72 hours prior to meetings, except for specific findings. No action or discussion may be undertaken by the Planning Commission on any item if not posted on the agenda, except that commissioners or staff may briefly respond to statements made or questions posed by the public, or a commissioner or staff liaison may ask a question for clarification or make a brief report on his or her own activities. A commissioner or the commission itself may provide a reference to staff to report back to the commission at a subsequent meeting concerning any matter, or may direct staff to place a matter of business on a future agenda. Do we at this time have anybody who is not an applicant on tonight's agenda that would like to provide a public comment?
There is currently one caller in the queue for public comment.
Great, will you please put them through?
Good evening, caller. We are currently taking public comment for items not on the agenda. Please state your name and address for the record. You may begin with your comment.
Hello?
Hello, caller?
Yeah.
Yes, we're currently taking comment on items not on the agenda. You may proceed.
Sure. I called in to talk about one of the items on the agenda. So
If you would like to, if you would like to call back once the item that you would like to speak about begins, we will put you in the queue and let you in when the public comment for that item begins.
Sure. Okay. I did send it an email, but I do not know if you got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, hearing no other callers on the line, we will move on to the first item on the agenda, a presentation on housing and land use related bills in the state legislature, part 2. Deputy City Attorney Garagosian.
Thank you, Chair Dennison. Let's see if I can put this on the screen. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yes, you just have to go to full screen.
Perfect. How about now?
Yes.
All right, great. So this is the second part of the series called Senate's 2020 Housing Package. We're talking about these Senate bills because these are the ones most likely to pass the legislature. All these bills are currently out of the Senate and they're before the Assembly. And none of them have been amended by the Assembly yet, and they have pretty broad support in the Senate. So we have 6 bills currently that are part of the housing package. Today, we're going to talk about SB 889 or 899, SB 995, SB 1085, and SB 1385. At the last meeting, we spoke about SB 902 and SB 1120, so I won't be covering those today. So we begin with SB 995 and with some background. The current law requires the court to give CEQA-related cases preference over all other civil actions. That means if there are, let's say, 5 different cases that the court has to hear, it'll hear the CEQA case first. And so a number of years back in 2011, the legislator passed AB 900 that, in addition to this preference, required that for certain development projects, the court is going to review and have a final judgment on a CEQA-related case within 270 days after certification of the administrative record. So one issue that developers have had in the past is that these CEQA cases take a really long time and it holds up the project. And so for some of these very large projects, the legislator basically placed a hard deadline on when the court has to render a decision. SB 995 adds affordable housing to the list of projects that are eligible for this fast track review and that qualify for this deadline. So here's how the SB 995 will work. The governor is going to certify, generally a governor certifies a project as an environmental leadership development project eligible for streamlining. It applies to the following projects: residential, retail, commercial, sport, cultural, entertainment, or recreational use projects of $100 million or more, clean renewable energy projects, and clean emergency manufacturing projects. So as you can imagine, these are all very large projects. Some that you may have heard of include the Sacramento Kings Arena, the Golden State Warriors Arena, and there was a development project called 8150 Sunset Boulevard. These all got approved with the prior version. So before the affordable housing component, well, it hasn't been added yet, but this is all before, this is under the current law. So SB 995 extends the governor's certification authority to 2025 because it was set to expire, I believe, in 2021. And it certifies housing projects that are located at an urban infill site, consistent with a sustainable community strategy or alternative planning strategy, a minimum investment of 15 million. So these are much smaller projects than what this law has been applied to before, and affordable with a minimum of 15% of units for lower income households. So that's low income, very low income, extreme low income. And also has to meet a number of other requirements. So prevailing wages, no additional net emissions of greenhouse gases. It needs to comply with recycling of solid waste, mitigation measures, and the applicant has to agree to pay for litigation-related costs associated with the project. So that's SB 995. Now turning to SB 1385, maybe the most consequential one out of the list today. It applies to this new thing called neighborhood lots. So again, some background. Due to COVID-19 and Amazon, a lot of these large retailers are being forced out of the business. So think about Sears and Toys R Us. The investment firm UBS estimates that by 2025, 100,000 stores in the US will close as online sales grow from 15% to 25% of total retail sales. To prevent rundown commercial centers and to increase the supply of housing, the state proposes creating neighborhood lots. These are all specific findings that have been made in the bill itself. And a neighborhood lot is defined as a lot zoned for office or retail uses that is eligible for a housing development project pursuant to the government code section. So if a project is going to qualify for this type of streamlining, first it has to satisfy the Mullen densities. We talked about Mullen densities yesterday. Basically, for a city like Sierra Madre, a Mullen density is about, for an urban center, it's 30 units per acre. That's the minimum. It needs to satisfy development and zoning standards for a zone with the above residential densities. It needs to satisfy any additional zoning requirements for neighborhood lots. So if this passes, you can have additional zoning standards for neighborhood lots. And it needs to be located in an urban infill area that has no existing commercial or residential tenants on 50% or more of its total square footage for a period of at least 3 years. So this law is really contemplating, a big strip mall, and Toys R Us and let's say Sears are their two largest retail, are their anchor tenants, and they go under. And so you have less than 50% of this strip mall being rented out to tenants. And so it really contemplates situations like that and converting that commercial space into residential. There's a prohibition on short-term rentals. Neighborhood lots are exempt from development where city reallocates lost residential density elsewhere, meaning you don't have to necessarily go through this neighborhood lot process. You can prevent it if you can reallocate the density. Applicants must provide notice of development to commercial tenants on neighborhood lots, and the applicant may request establishment of community facilities districts or annexations to an existing district to provide services to the residential community. SB 899, you may have heard about this one at one of the city council meetings we had recently. So this applies to, some background again, some religious institutions and nonprofit higher education institutions like colleges own a lot of land in resource-rich communities and have tight finances. As religious institutions see declining congregations and colleges see cuts to budgets, leasing land for affordable housing could help generate needed revenue. SB 899 allows colleges or religious institutions to partner with a local public entity or nonprofit housing developer to build a housing development by right under certain conditions. So here are the conditions. Within an urban infill site, it can't be within a very high fire hazard severity zone. It can't be within a historic district. The parcel has to be at least a 1/4 acre or in size or greater. 100% of the units are affordable and rent or sales price restricted, except that up to 20% may be moderate income households. It needs to comply with all objective development standards, and it doesn't demolish existing affordable housing or evict tenants of affordable housing to be constructed. It also needs to be in a residential mixed use or commercial zone that meets the following density requirements. Again, it has to be a minimum of 30 units per acre. But in a commercial zone, it can be up to 40 units per acre, and it gets an additional story increase. And you can adopt local ordinances that have minimums greater than these, but these are the ones proposed by state law. A housing development project is in a residential / mixed use / commercial zone if on a parcel zone for education or religious use, or a parcel is adjacent to a parcel located in a residential, mixed use, or commercial zone. It permits ancillary uses on the ground floor. So you can have childcare centers and community centers, and you can have housing on top of that. You can also have some commercial uses, like to think of like a convenience store or something, and housing on top of that. There are special parking requirements, and local ordinances may provide that use by right does not exempt the development from design review. So you can have design review for these projects. And 1080.
Can I ask you a question on that last one before we go on?
Sure.
You talked about the Mullen densities at 30 for residential or 40 for mixed use commercial.
Yes.
So that means if somebody qualifies for one of those projects, they get to have that level of density no matter what the locals say?
Correct.
Okay, so if a higher education or religious organization wants to do that affordable housing in town and it otherwise meets the criteria, they can do 30 to 40 units an acre, depending on where they are, notwithstanding what our local zoning says.
Correct. If they meet all the different criteria, then notwithstanding our zoning, they can have a 30 unit per acre residential structure.
Okay. And the 1-story increase in commercial means that if it were in the commercial zone where we allow 2, they could do 3 stories.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And I don't know that we have too many sites like this in Sierra Madre, and obviously a lot of these won't really even apply to Sierra Madre, but it's just something to be aware of because it's going to affect our neighboring communities as well. So SB 1085, this deals with something near and dear to all your hearts, the density bonus ordinance. So as you know, most density bonus projects rely on very low income thresholds. So I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but it turns out this is the case. Because the very low income threshold is, I think, only 5 units or 5% of the units in the development. It's the one that developers often rely on because it's so easy to meet, because the threshold is so low, and as a result, oftentimes a lot of low income units are not built. So SB 1085 is an attempt to encourage developers to build low income units, not just very low income units, which get built, or moderate income units, which also get built. Move to the next slide. So it increases the max, it also increases the maximum density bonus award from 35% to 40% for very low income households. It grants incentives and concessions for student housing and mixed low moderate income developments. It removes the physical environment from the list of specific impacts evaluated to reject concessions, incentives, or waivers. And it prohibits fees related to affordable housing, including inclusionary zoning fees, in lieu fees, and public benefit fees. Sorry, just to go back to that slide again, what I didn't mention, I forgot to mention, is SB 1085, that second bullet point, grants a density bonus of 35% for developments where 20% of the units are for lower moderate income households. And so that's the way it's trying to encourage low income housing, is by it's granting basically a much greater density bonus for 20% of the, if the project consists of 20% lower moderate income households. And that's all I have. The density bonus amendments that are proposed are relatively minimal. So if we need to make amendments next year, it's going to be very simple.
What is the status of the density bonuses that we reviewed and recommended to the city council? Have those been approved yet? Or are they still in the queue?
Those have been, those were read and introduced at the last city council meeting, and then they're set for a second reading for the following city council meeting.
Okay. And did the city council make any amendments, or did they adopt it as is?
They adopted it with the planning commission's recommendations.
Okay, great. Okay, so then if 1065 passes, we'll just have to do a minor amendment on those, right?
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you.
That's all I have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next up on our list is design review permit 20-01 and minor conditional use permit 20-02 for 333 North Sunnyside Avenue. Do we have a presentation from staff?
We have a staff presentation from Assistant Planner Joshua Wolf, and he does have a PowerPoint presentation for you today, so he's going to cue that up as well.
Good evening, commissioners. Give me a moment while I share my screen. Okay, there it is. All right, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So tonight the commission will be considering applications for design review permit 2001 and minor conditional use permit 20-02. Here's the location of the property. Again, it is a reverse corner lot situated at the intersection of West Allegria and North Sunnyside Avenue. And the proposed project is continued from the June 4th Planning Commission meeting. The project is for a room addition of 497 square feet and an interior remodel. The design review permit is to allow for the floor area in excess of 3,500 square feet in gross floor area on a single family residential zone. And the minor conditional use permit is to maintain the existing non-conforming 2-car covered parking spaces provided, where the addition would trigger the requirement for 3 covered parking spaces because there are 5 or more bedrooms in the house. So from last commission meeting, we had concerns from the commission. The first of that being that the plate height of the addition was inconsistent with the existing structures, So the applicant decided to have that remain unchanged due to the difficulties that a lower plate height would cause in the roof structure. And the applicant's project designer will be presenting the reasoning for the plate height following the staff presentation. Concern number 2 is the treatment of the exterior of the chimney that was revised on plan to be finished with a smooth stucco consistent with the exterior finish of the walls. And in concern number 3 was for the landscape to include some level of privacy in the backyard. That was revised, and actually it was revised to show what is existing, providing photos for showing a 5-foot tall CMU block wall topped with a lattice topper and vegetation along the southern edge of that property line. And concern number 4 was for the roof material to be more sustainable. So the applicant responded with a revised color to the roof to change from black to gray and included efficiency statistics of the proposed metal roof. The 5th concern was that the trellis structures were not consistent with the ranch style architecture, nor finished with a landing outside. The revised material was to be consistent with a very high fire hazard severity zone, and it includes a composite Trex material, decking and trellis material used, and the trellis was repainted white to mimic a ranch style, a typical ranch trellis structure. And the last concern was that the recreation room was configured like a bedroom to give the impression that this was an addition of a bedroom. The applicant responded by revising the floor plan to show a 50% opening on the side of the hallway. And the bedroom count by this then remains the same as it is existing. And I'll demonstrate that with a table here, and then we'll look at a floor plan later. So here's the basic program of the floor plan. We have on the second column here, the existing number of rooms, and the third column showing the proposed number of rooms. And really the only change is the addition of a recreation room. Everything else is reconfigured but stays the same. And then we have things such as entry, laundry room, and garage, which I haven't counted, even though they're not called out in the city's municipal code as counting towards parking, just because the garage provides for that parking, and laundry rooms and entry rooms are assumed to not be counted as bedrooms. So here's the project summary. Pretty much all of it had stayed consistent. I did change the meeting of the code for parking to a no, because the applicant is requesting a minor conditional use permit to continue the non-conforming status. So here is a revised floor plan of the roof plan. Really the only comment on this roof plan was to show the chimney, which has been done. And following that are the elevations showing the new non-combustible smooth stucco siding, where it shows on all the walls is now showing in the chimney area here, along with the new non-combustible roof, trellis structure here with the deck below. All of this will be a permeable surface, so water can flow through it, and it will not trigger a requirement for low impact development plans. Similarly, the trellis structure is shown on the east elevation on the left side here. And then on the site plan, it was revised to show a CMU block wall here. This is where my mouse is right now, is the west property line. And the block wall starts at the face of the existing structure and moves towards the back along towards the north. And we have the lattice topper on top of that, and then bushes along, existing bushes along the side as well. And here are pictures of that the applicant had provided and included in the staff report as well. And in this larger picture, you can see that there is a block wall running towards the back with vegetation growing over. The material board was revised simply to change the black metal roof to a gray color in order to improve the energy efficiency of it, and then showed the reference to a ranch style trellis here. And then we wanted to provide some energy efficiency statistics. So there's an excerpt here from a website referenced by the applicant demonstrating the sustainability and energy efficiency of a metal roof, providing that there will be a larger benefit in energy savings for cooling the house than there would be for heating the house. And actually, this blurb will say that an asphalt roof is better and more sustainable for heating a house. But here we are in Southern California where temperatures are rising, and it would be more beneficial to have energy savings in a cool, when you need to cool a building. So the 3D renderings were also updated to show a gray roof, the white trellis structure now with a deck below, and again, a reference to the ranch style architecture. The colored renderings were revised as well to do all the same things here. White stucco on the chimney, gray metal roof, and trellis structures. And the design review findings remain pretty much the same, that the single family residence remains consistent. The project is a single story utilizing low profile hips. It does not unreasonably interfere with the use, possession, and enjoyment of surrounding adjacent properties. The project maintains the existing height and is small in bulk, scale, and massing so that it is compatible with the neighborhood. And the proposed project remains single story. It does reflect the scale of the neighborhood, and it does not detract from the Foothill Village setting. The proposed project remains single story utilizing low profile design features. It does not interfere with the public views and privacy of the neighbors, nor causes unreasonable noise levels. It is a coherent project-wide design. It's demonstrated through the use of materials of the metal roof and the siding. The project is not seeking relief from development standards for the purposes of architectural features. And the proposal is a superior project in that it is innovative and thoughtful by allowing for the creative open space incorporation. It preserves the natural landscaping. It uses high quality materials and energy efficient materials. And then for minor conditional use permit, we have to make the findings. These remained somewhat similar. There was changes to these so that the project is not detrimental and is consistent with the residential character of the neighborhood. The proposed project complies with the development standards of the single family residential zoning. The proposed project remains single family, does not unreasonably interfere with the use, possession, and enjoyment of adjacent property owners. There is a demonstrated need for the proposed project in that the siding of the existing garage is located at the minimum 10 feet side yard setback that is required by the zoning code. An expansion of that is prohibitive. The proposed project will maintain to be compatible with the residential character of the neighborhood and does not change the essential character of the surrounding area, and that the rooms created are typical of a single family dwelling. And the parking deficit will not unreasonably overload street parking or create nuisances in that there is an existing 2-car garage providing parking, as well as driveway space providing for 3 additional spaces on that site that are not covered. Moreover, because the property is on a corner lot, it does provide more street parking than the typical interior lot. Tonight, the Planning Commission can approve Design Review Permit 2001 and Minor Conditional Use Permit 2002. It can approve these applications with modifications. It can deny the request, citing reasons for findings for denial, or it can continue the project and provide direction to staff and the applicant. Tonight, staff recommends you approve Design Review Permit 2001 and Minor Conditional Use Permit 2002 pursuant to the Resolution 2006 with attached conditions of approval. Thank you very much. And this concludes staff presentation. The applicant has also prepared a presentation for the commission tonight. And that's it.
Thank you. If the applicant would like to share their presentation with us. I'm sorry, before we do that, are there any questions for staff?
I don't believe so. I think Daphne wanted to present with respect to the roofing, and then I'm happy to discuss some of the further findings with respect to the metal roof, and then a couple of nearby recent metal roofs in Sierra Madre that are pretty consistent with what we have in mind.
All right, if there's no questions from commissioners or staff, then we'll go ahead and have the applicant present. Thank you.
Joshua, what order would you like us to go through? You want Daphne to talk about the roof?
If she has it prepared, yes.
Yeah, I can talk about the roof idea. Let me share my screen. Share screen. Hi everybody. I would like to explain how the roof was designed. Can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, this is the existing roof. It's pretty much just one big slope with this original addition on the top. And then the second page is the rendering we just showed. And it basically extends the original roof ridge. It kept the same height and then turned 90 degrees and then becomes the new addition. You know, I tried a couple ways to do the new roof. This is option number one. Because the addition is wider than the original house, if we do the same slope 4 to 12, the attic will be over 7 feet. And also it will kind of conflict with the original ridge. So we thought about another option, which is extend the ridge line and keep the same slope, but obviously on the left side, it will be too low, only 4 feet, it's not usable. So, and then the third option will be turning it 90 degrees. And so this way the attic won't be too high and we won't waste some of the space. But obviously there's a conflict at the edge. So that's why I come up with the number 4, which is our current design. Basically we add the roof like a 90 degree and then continue the original ridge and then turn into the addition. I can zoom in at the bottom. The reason the plate is a bit higher than the original because the roof stops here. It didn't stop, you know, the same location as the original roof. But then that can make the plate higher. If we want the new addition to have the same roof height as the original house, you can see the other line here. We need to change the slope of the roof, which will be different from the original one. So I kept it the same 4 to 12. So that's why it's a little higher. But we were thinking we have enough attic space, and then this part is a bigger room, so it's a little bit higher roof. We think it's reasonable. The main reason is we want to keep the same slope as, you know, the original house. We don't want to only make this part like a steeper slope. I think that's all. So that's why we come up with the design. It's basically extend the original roof and then turn into the addition, and that's all.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Daphne.
Daphne, what's your last name and affiliation with the project, please, for the record?
Chai. Chai.
Okay, and you're the designer of the project?
Yes, I am the designer.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any questions for Ms. Chai?
And if we can have Daphne state her name for the record.
Yes.
If you can just state your name for the record.
My name is Daphne Chai.
Okay, thank you.
All right, did the applicant have any other presentations they would like to put forth before the commission?
Yeah, you can show the other pictures if you want. Yeah, hi. I wanted to just kind of go through a little bit more detail on some of the research that we had done. And in the previous presentation, there were concerns that a metal roof with the sun in Southern California would actually be energy inefficient for this type of a property. We had done some research and had forwarded a couple of links. One from bobvila.com. Most people probably have heard of him, and then homeadvisor.com. And both of the reports had pretty similar findings, talking about metal roofs, how they are the greenest of the roofs, roughly 40% less energy consumption during the summertime months as compared to an asphalt shingle, because the metal actually reflects the heat, whereas the asphalt shingle absorbs the heat and transfers that heat through the house. And as Joshua had mentioned, it states that the asphalt shingles are actually better in cold areas where you're trying to draw in heat during like the winter times in a higher climate, whereas the metal roofs are better in a hotter area. Additionally, the metal roofs are stated to be more eco-friendly. They're typically made from recycled materials, and then they can be re-recycled if they're ultimately removed. They are longer lasting, roughly 40 to 70 years on average, relative to a 15 to 30 year lifespan on asphalt shingle. And the asphalt is a petroleum based, which uses up fossil fuels. Generally speaking, the primary advantages with the metal roofs are they're lighter weight and again, more durable. They hold up better to rain, to hail, and to wind relative to the asphalt shingle. They absorb less of the summer heat. And they also actually come with more tax credits as a result of that. Again, 100% recyclable, and they don't rot, mildew, mold, or algae, whereas some of the asphalt shingle can. So really the primary disadvantage to the metal is, they're more expensive to install, but otherwise in terms of sustainability, energy efficiency, they're actually considered to be quite a bit better than the asphalt shingle. And I had taken a few pictures of a couple of the nearby houses. One is at 140 East Grandview, and another is at 126 East Grandview, and they're both very similar in style and relatively new metal roofs that are fairly similar to what we're looking to do. The property at 140 East Grandview is a recent remodel. I'm not sure the exact date, but we've got a couple pictures that we'll try to pull up real quick on that.
Okay, so I think I have problem with the Zoom. Can you guys see us? Or we're reconnecting, okay.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, and we can see you.
Okay. All right, we're having video difficulties, but not audio, fortunately. And then the property at 126 East Grandview looks like it was a recent brand new construction, and that one, both of the roofs they're I think 2 or 3 doors apart on East Grandview, just east of Baldwin. So this first one here is the new house at 126 East Grandview, and I wasn't able to kind of stand up high enough, even though I'm 6'4", but you can kind of see that it's got the metal roof design. That's probably the best of the three. I don't know if you're able to zoom in on that. on the roof part. But the eastern side of that is a slightly sloped metal roof on that. And then, and again, that was brand new construction. And then this next one is 140 East Grandview, which is 2 or 3 doors to the east of that. And this is one where it was a remodel, I think just a couple of years ago. And it looks like a very similar metal roof there. And that was a remodel, so kind of more consistent with what we're looking to do. Yeah, that's the 126 East Grandview. That's the new one. So those are two of the I think nearest examples in Sierra Madre of what we're somewhat hoping to emulate.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions from the commission for the applicant?
Yeah, I have a question about the solar panels. There was a discussion at the last meeting of potentially putting solar panels on it, and like you to address, you know, if you did any research on that and why you decided not to install those.
Well, we haven't made a decision yet either way. We've reached out to a few people and we've had some discussions. It is something that we are open to considering, primarily if we were to do it on maybe the western side, which would be the backyard side. The compatibility and the appearance, there's so many different styles. So it's been a little bit challenging to kind of try to put it all into a specific decision, but I'd like to have that opportunity to be able to add it without the requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions of the applicant from the commission? All right, we did skip disclosure of site visits and ex parte contacts. Did anybody on the commission, I know that many of us had visited it the first time it came by. Did anybody go by and see the site a second time?
I did.
No.
Yeah, I went by this one and the other one before, but I didn't go by again.
Like you, I went by both last time, but not this time. Okay, so then I guess we should hear now from the public, if there's any public comment about this topic as it is on the agenda, then you should call in to 669-900-9128. Our meeting ID is 626-232-0232, and the password is 232242. This is the number to call to discuss public comment on this particular agenda item. Oscar, is there anybody who has dialed in to make a public comment?
Please stand by. Give us 1 second.
There are currently no callers for public comment on this item.
All right. In light of that, we will bring this back to the commission for discussion. Who would like to lead us off? Commissioner Pevsner, nice of you to volunteer.
Sure. I think that they've made a reasonable accommodation to mitigate our concerns, and I see no problem with the remaining 2-car garage for the minor CUP. I think that's for the most part. I didn't see a landscaping plan, but I assume since this is going to be a major remodel, that'll be part of the project. But I can make the findings for the house itself.
All right. Thank you. Commissioner Spears, you want to comment?
Sure. The parking, I think, is addressable because there is a parking on the apron going to the garage, and plus it does have street parking. That's not an area where traditionally we have a lot of problems on finding parking access. My concern at the last meeting was the relationship between this property and the property to the west, and the addition, the sight lines, you know, looking down. To the west, there's a two-story building that would look down into this backyard. I think that they're going to add some addition to the block wall and the additional planting, and continue the planting on, out, and around, which will also help mitigate the appearance of the addition. Other than that, I think the problem with that was posed at the last commission meeting was the color of the metal roof was a darker color, and the applicant has mitigated that by making it a lighter gray, which I think will reap benefits in terms of energy efficiency. So I can make the findings.
Thank you. Commissioner Hutt, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I think it's good to start back to where we were at the beginning, and the basic bones of this remodel, I think, is a positive thing. The applicant is not going up to a second story, not doing a monster house, improving the roof, the stucco. I think generally overall it's a good project. I think that was where I felt last time. There's a couple of minor tweaks we asked them to do. They looked at the roof. I'm still not sold that the way they're handling the roof on the new addition is the way I would have done it, but they certainly put thought into it, and I don't think it gives me heartburn. So if that's the way they want to do it, that's fine. I think as far as the solar goes, you know, they can add that later if they want. I don't have any heartburn with the parking. I think the trellises are fine. I know that was discussed at the last meeting. So I can make all the findings. I think it's a good project.
Great. And I was not at the last meeting, but I did review the comments from all of the commissioners, and it seems like the remediation that came back forth before us was responsive to the commission, which while we may not be all unanimous on it being our particular design, it clearly was well thought out and was responsive to what the commission asked. And so I also can make the findings. It sounds like we have an opinion here, so I will look for a motion.
I'll move that we approve design review permit 20-1 and minor CUP 20-2 as proposed.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All those opposed? Unanimously carries design review permit 2001 and minor conditional use permit 2002. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is design review permit 20-02 for 370 North Grove Street. Is there a presentation from staff?
We do have a staff presentation, will be delivered by Claire Lynn, Associate.
Excuse me, Vincent, can you let the applicant in?
I got it. I got it.
Thank you.
Yeah, he should, I let him in.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. This evening, we'll be reviewing a design review permit. (2002) for the property located at 370 North Grove Street. That is continued from the June 18th meeting. The subject property is a vacant parcel located north of Grandview and on the east side of Grove Street. The applicant is requesting to develop the vacant parcel with a new 2-story single-family residence with attached 2-car garage and accessory dwelling unit in the rear. Pursuant to the municipal code, design review permit is required to allow a new construction proposed to include a second story. To recap from the last meeting, this will be a focused presentation on the commission's comment. Commission's concern at the last meeting was the mechanical room exceeded the allowable height and also encroached into the angle plane. Applicant has revised the design and lowered the height of the mechanical room and also avoid the angle plane. The second concern was the bulk and mass that interferes with the enjoyment and the views of the neighboring property. So the applicant has lowered the building pad by 1 foot 8 inches, relocated the footprint 12 inches towards the south, and also have changing the exterior finish, the metal wall cladding to raised 5 feet from the ground to eliminate the metal cladding and introduce stucco finishes. The third concern was the articulation on the front facade. So the applicant has extended the second floor overhang and incorporate a ribbon window with the spandrel glass, and also painted the garage door to match the entrance door. The fourth concern that Planning Commission had was the structural detail, lacking to provide the structural detail on the foundation for the accessory structure in the rear, and also an updated tree report. Applicant has provided the structural, but I have not yet received the updated tree report. The proposed project is a code-compliant project. It complies with the lot size, lot coverage, building height, gross floor area, and setbacks. Also be complied with the parking requirement. Here is the site plan showing the proposed project has relocated southward by 12 inches, creating that 8-foot north side yard setback. And on the site section, you can see that the building footprint has been lowered to 1 foot 8 inches, and the overall height of the structure has been lowered by 1 foot 6 inches. Here are the sections showing that the mechanical room has been eliminated and the tower structure has been lowered to comply with the building height and the angle plane. Another section cutting through the building, showing that the mechanical room is lowered, and also the section on the bottom showing that the plate height of the first floor is lowered by 8 inches. The plate height of the second floor is lowered by 10 inches. And also on the street facade, the second floor is extended to have this break-in mass with the recessed garage door. The proposed floor plan the layout remain unchanged. Only the mechanical room is moved into the building by 8 inches, and also the second floor, like I mentioned before, the floor plan extended by 12 inches. Here is the proposed roof plan that showing the mechanical room has been reduced. And there was a comment about the solar panel being integrated into the metal roof. The designer has not provided any updates on that. Here are the west elevation, the previously proposed and the revised elevation, showing that the utility shaft have been lowered and comply with the angle plan. Also, you can see the metal sheet cladding between the two windows for the street front facade has been replaced with spandrel glass to show as a one continuous ribbon window. And the garage is recessed to break the massing. The north elevation, that the mechanical shaft is lowered, and it was recommended to have a home finish CMU block. The applicant has preferred to paint it with smooth finish. The continuous standing seam metal roof, continued from the roof to the wall, has been lifted 5 feet from the ground. So it incorporated more of the stucco and less of the metal standing seam metal. Here is the revised south elevation. On this side as well, the standing seam metal material is tapered and it's lifted about 3 feet from the ground. Materials for the project remain unchanged, although we have suggested to introduce a wood material, but it's the applicant's design choice to maintain these materials without introducing any new. And there was a question regarding the accessory structure and the way that it should anchor to the foundation. So the applicant has provided a structure details to anchor the wheel with the wedge and bolt it down to the ground. It has been reviewed by our building official for preliminary design. Here is the 3D renderings of the street front elevation, showing that the mass has divided into two, and the standing seam metal roof on both ends has been tapered. And also the spandrel glass in between the two windows. You can also see it from here that the whole building pad is lowered compared to what it was proposed before. Here is the 3D renderings, viewing from the south and then viewing from the north. Design review permit findings has to be made in order to approve the project. And here are the summaries that the project as a single family residence is consistent with the low density general plan destination, and it complies with floor area, lot coverage, building height, building setback requirement. The project will not unreasonably interfere with the use, possession, or enjoyment of the surrounding properties, as it provides and preserves the existing trees on site. The bulk and mass and siding of the proposed project are compatible with the existing neighborhood, and to be even more compliant to it, the building pad has been lowered 1 foot 8 inches. The proposed project also reflects the scale of the neighborhood, in which that it is not visually overpower or dominate the neighborhood or detract from the village setting. With the reduction of the mechanical shaft and also change of the material, the project will not unreasonable interfere with the public view and views and privacy of the neighbor. And the footprint has moved southward and create that 8-foot north side yard setback away from the adjacent property. And with minimum window openings on the north and the south elevation, it will not interfere with the neighboring property. The project also exhibit coherent project-wide design and construct with high quality material. The project is not seeking relief from development standards or additional height. The project of 2,618 square feet is below the size threshold for finding number 8. The alternative before Planning Commission this evening is to approve the request for design review permit 2002, approve the request with modification, or deny the request citing the reason and finding for denial, or continue the project and provide directions to the applicant and staff. Staff is recommending that Planning Commission take the following action to approve the application for design review permit 2002 pursuant to Planning Commission Resolution 2009, subject to the conditions of approval. That concludes my presentation, and I just want to note that there were 2 public comments that were submitted and passed along to the Planning Commission.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff at this time from the commission?
Yeah, I have one question. With regard to the solar panels, because this is new construction, those are going to be required by state law, right?
Yes, it's required by building code.
So the issue is just really whether they're integrated into the standing seam roof or whether they're put on top.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
I have one request for staff. In the past, the written communications that come in about projects has been copied, and it was available on the dais when we came in and sat down. Since we are no longer coming in and sit down, you are sending it to us, and this, because this process is now, you know, in its 2nd meeting, I think I remember 3 pieces of communication from neighbors. I think as long as we're going to meet virtually, those communications should become part of our packet so that we can go back and refer to, because I think some of them have been addressed and some of them not, and it's hard to always print out and set aside the communication that is relevant for whatever application we're looking at.
Yes, what we try to do is because many times, certainly we could provide the public comments that we received at the prior meeting. Under the current meeting, like this evening, we would receive them actually during this meeting, which I did forward to the commission and also previously. So it's hard to get the current comments, but certainly we can provide the prior comments that were received from the previous meeting and include that in your packet.
I think I remember 3. One was from a neighbor who had reservations about the way that the building presented to the street. One was from a neighbor to the south that was objected about the view lines. And then we had one tonight that had some other concerns about the materials. And I think those were the 3 that are relevant to this application?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think it would be helpful to have those as we look at the evolution of the application so that we can see whether they've been addressed or not and how they've been mitigated.
We'll do that from now on.
Just while, since we're in this COVID process.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Sounds like there are no more questions for staff. Does the applicant have anything that they would like to share with us tonight?
Yes, I was just gonna say that the house footprint, it didn't move a foot. We only moved it south 6 inches, and then we pushed the MEP room in 6 inches. So that's why the setback is 8 feet, but it only moved 6 inches, not a foot.
All right. At this time, we will take it back to the commission, but before we do so, we'll accept public comment on this particular agenda item. If anybody would like to call in and provide public comment, the phone number is 669-900-9128. Meeting ID 626-232-0232, and the password is 232242. This is the number to call if you would like to discuss this particular agenda item before the commission.
You do have a caller in line for public comment. I will patch them through now.
Thank you.
Good evening, caller. Please state your name and address for the record. You may proceed with your comments.
Heather Allen, Grove Street. I was looking at the plans online. Hello? And I'm a little confused about the color of the garage door. I see that it's sort of an aqua color in the staff report, and I'm wondering, is that the true color of what it's going to be like? It seems kind of bright and garish. And I'm wondering, is that the color that they are actually going to paint it? Or is there any possibility they might consider doing something more of a natural color? That's all. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Oscar, do we have any?
We do have a few more.
Perfect.
We do have. Currently, there are 2 people waiting for comment.
Great. You can send the next one through. Thank you.
Good evening, caller. If you are currently listening to our meeting live, please mute your TV to avoid feedback. Please state your name and address for the record. You may proceed with your comment.
Yes, hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Rosita Cooper, and I live to the north of the property at 374 Grove. I called in to the last meeting too, and I just wanted to call again to state that I do appreciate the changes that have been made to the plan. I appreciate that the MEP room was lowered so much because it really obstructed the view from our house, and I like the changes that have been made to the sheet metal that comes down from the roof, especially the little side, you know, how it comes in further. I am still a little confused by the sheet metal that comes down from the roof, but you know, that's a design choice that the applicant is making. And then the last thing I wanted to note is that as we're going to be new neighbors, me and my family were very happy and welcome to have a conversation with the applicant as well. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you'll put through the next caller.
Good evening, caller. Please state your name and address for the record. You may proceed with your comment. Caller, are you there?
Hi, have you come to me? It's a little tough to tell sometimes.
Yes, you are on, and you may provide your comment.
Okay, I did send in a written comment, and I did discuss the material of the roof, so I do not know if that's what the comment was received in time. I sent it at 6:15, and you did request it at 6. I apologize, but I do not know if that made it to the commission.
Why don't you go ahead and share your concerns with us? And if you wouldn't mind leading off with your name and address, if possible, that would be great.
Sure. I'm Doug DeVore. I live at 350 Grove, so 3 houses down from the proposed site here. And I've got a few comments. Like my other neighbor, I do appreciate some of the general changes that are made. The lowering the setback, changing roof lines, the massing concern in the front, all nice changes. So I definitely do appreciate that, and kind of think it's cool. You're trying to do a Leeds house and all that. So it's very exciting about that. I had a concern last time about parking, and I don't know how that works out. It's a 2-car garage. It's a multi-bedroom home with an accessory dwelling unit. So I do not know where that person parks. My understanding was that you're supposed to have covered parking for something like that based on conversation with neighbors who've had, say, guest houses or mother-in-law suites. So I don't know how that works out. And if somebody could clarify that, that'd be great. I'd say my bigger question about the whole thing is the outside materials. I've got to state that a standing seam roof for siding is just not anything I've seen in Sierra Madre. I know we have a general plan, and we're trying to make a certain feel for the town, but stainless, or not stainless steel, but like galvanized steel roofing coming down the side of the house, I appreciate it's been shortened, but it's still at 5 feet. Unless somebody's within your wall, you'll never know it. So it's going to look like whatever comes up over the wall is just a big metal side, and that just doesn't seem in character with anything in the neighborhood. We do have some houses that are mid-century and more modern, but they're done with stained woods, redwoods or cedar, and they sort of fit more in the flavor of the neighborhood, if not the town. So I just don't know of any other structure, at least in this neighborhood, where it's a metal siding like that and in a bright color. So I just don't think it fits that general plan 17.20 section where it says, if I can quote, maintaining architectural accord with the character of the existing neighborhood. I just don't, this is not a traditional style home anyway. It's not, Victorian or mid-century or something. So it's quite an unusual shape. But I was wondering if there's some way to refine the materials so that it doesn't stick out so much. It looks very commercial. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments?
There are no more callers from the comment at this time.
Great, thank you. As we bring this back to the commission, I did have a question for Deputy City Attorney Garagosian. My understanding of the ADU code, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that parking is not a consideration that we can make with regards to ADUs. Can you clarify that position for me?
Yes, thank you for the question. So the Planning Commission is not considering the ADUs at this time, only the primary structure. But to answer the applicant's question, covered parking, with the change in the new law, covered parking is no longer required for the ADU, although a parking space is required, but that could be tandem parking, doesn't need to be covered.
And by tandem parking, you mean that the apron between the driveway, or between the garage door and the rest of the street, that area is considered tandem parking?
In this case, yeah, exactly.
Okay, great, thank you. Are there, I guess, having had public comment, we'll go ahead and bring this back to the commission. Is there somebody who would like to start off?
I'll go first.
Great, thank you.
So he made the accommodation to the roof height, and I think tried to make some accommodations with the seamed roof and the appearance to the neighbors on the south and the north. And although he's getting most of his original design, which I thought was very creative. So he made, as far as I'm concerned, he corrected all the concerns trying to get as much out of what his design that he was trying to originally have in the first place. And I think it's a big improvement, and I can make the findings.
Thank you. Another commissioner?
I'll go. He addressed the issue of the angle plane by both lowering the MEP and then also moving the site. Since he's starting from zero on it's new construction, that was a good thing to do. The other kinds of concerns we've seen from the neighbors, I think they've been addressed. The one, I think there's a missed opportunity here, but we can't really, we don't have any authority on it, is that if he's presenting a design that is meant to look like a barn, the garage door that faces the community doesn't represent a barn. And even if you made the doors larger than the opening for the garage, you could convey or evoke a more, I don't know, friendly and whimsical presentation that would go with the ADU. So I perceive that as a missed opportunity in terms of design, but it's his design, and we cannot, I mean, we don't have authority there. So he's addressed the angle plane, he's moved and lowered the structure. So I believe that the concerns from the neighbors of the south have been addressed. At least we did not hear that tonight. And so I can make the findings.
Yeah, Jake.
Thank you. Commissioner Hutt?
Going to bed.
Yeah, I concur with the commissioners. I think this is an improvement. I appreciate the lowering of the MEP room. I also appreciate the honesty of the MEP room materials instead of having fake rock on there, which would be totally out of character. But really, you know, the findings that we make with regard to materials aren't the type that are stylistic, and to the extent that they don't, the project as a whole doesn't interfere with the height, bulk, scale, mass, and siding, and that quality materials are used, we really don't have the authority to start nitpicking. And so I know that there's some concern from some of the neighbors about the use of siding, of roofing material that's sort of like siding because it's a barn shape. I really don't see that we have a legal standing to tell him to change that if it's not overpowering the neighbors, and I don't see that it is. I commiserate with the neighbors that this is going to be somewhat different. On the other hand, that's one of the things that makes Sierra Madre interesting, is that we've got unique and different houses, and this one certainly is going to be unique and different, and it's going to add character to the neighborhood. So I think all of the findings can be made, and I can support the project.
Thank you. I agree that there was a lot of effort taken and creative solutions to challenging issues of, you know, moving it the slightest bit, but changing the way that it's articulated so that it actually is moved further over and not breaking the angle plane, which I just don't think there was support for. I also concur that we don't have the purview into the design choices that are made. I think as a designer, he has stayed true as close as he possibly could within the confines of the code to the original design he had. I personally don't agree with the rest of the commission about the findings on bulk and massing. This is a huge 2-story block house. Every other 2-story block house we've ever come before us, we've said shrink part of it and articulate it. That has not been the opinion of the rest of the council or the rest of the commission on this. And so I won't stand in the way of blocking it, but I feel like it is just a big rectangle. And the house to the north, which I commented on the last meeting, does an incredible job of articulating. And I think my comment from last time was that it probably took him longer to put that into the renderings than it did his own house because of all the articulation on the front of that house. The house to the south has a ton of articulation. So I don't agree on the bulk and massing, but I don't have the support to get that changed. And so I'm happy to let the project proceed. And so hearing that, I will entertain a motion. Any motion?
I move that we, hello? Hello?
Oh, there you are. Thank you.
Yeah, I move that we approve design review permit 20-02.
I second the motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Aye. Motion carries 3-1. And thank you for your time. Next on the list, as I scroll back up to the agenda, forgive me. Next on the agenda for tonight is a discussion on the amendments to design review findings. Do we have a presentation from staff on this?
Actually, we have one item just before that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that. We have resolution number 20-10, declaring the sale of property located at 487 Woodland Drive, Sierra Madre, and finding that it is consistent with the Sierra Madre general plan. Do we have a presentation from staff on this item?
We have a presentation from our city attorney, Deputy City Attorney Alex Garagosian.
Thank you. I've submitted a staff report. I just have an oral presentation to give. I don't have a visual presentation for this item. Actually, let me just to allow people to focus on what's happening, I'm going to share my screen and show you on Google Maps where this property is currently located. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So in 2002, so why this is before the commission? The government code requires that any purchase of property or any disposition of property go to the planning commission first, so that there can be made, so a general plan consistency finding can be made. So let me talk about this property and give some background on it. In 2002, this property was purchased using funds from the county. It was the Los Angeles County Regional Park and Open Space District provided a $145,000 grant to purchase this property. And we purchased the property, the city purchased the property for the purpose of preserving a flood control channel. So this is a 15,500 square foot property, which, as I understand, is in comparison relatively large in comparison to the other properties in the canyon. It's zoned civic and city park, and it's surrounded by residential uses. The property isn't used by the public, to my knowledge. It's just used to preserve that flood control channel. And neighbors have approached the city interested in purchasing the property. If the city is at this point interested in selling the property, but it's going to preserve the drainage easement that runs directly through the middle of the property. The proposed drainage easement is going to cut right through the middle and segment it into two pieces. As a result, and due to the topography and the number of trees on the property, it's very difficult to develop the property for residential uses. It makes sense that one of the neighbors would like to purchase it because perhaps it would expand the size of their property. Maybe they can use like a portion of the property to expand their own home, but it'd be very difficult to build a freestanding individual residential property on a residential structure on that property. On June 23rd, 2020, the City Council adopted a resolution declaring the property to be exempt surplus property, as it must do under California state law. And in doing so, it also directed the Planning Commission to report on whether the sale of property is consistent with the Sierra Madre General Plan within 40 days of this resolution, pursuant to the following government code sections. So the first relevant government code section, 65566, says that a disposition of property must be found to be consistent with the local open space element. And the second relevant government code section says, and that's 65402, says a disposition of property must be consistent with the general plan. The staff believes that the disposition of this property would be consistent with the open space element of our general plan, because this property is not one of the properties listed in the Parks and Facilities Maintenance and Master Plan of the city. It was never intended for park purposes, and it's not useful for a park given its shape, drainage, and topography. Staff also believes that this property would serve the purposes of the general plan with respect to preventing flooding and reducing runoff, and encouraging permeable surfaces. By reserving that drainage easement, whoever we sell it to will have to purchase it subject to a drainage easement. And it also maintains the residential character of the neighborhood, because if this property is going to be sold, it's going to be sold for residential purposes, and it's likely be rezoned for residential purposes. And that's the end of my presentation. I can take your questions at this point.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions for Deputy City Attorney Gary Ghost?
We would grant neighboring property owners right away to access their properties, because I believe there's a landlocked property on the north or whatever uphill side.
If I'm understanding that the property you're referring to correctly, they already have an easement to access their property. So they
the 501 property, the property at 501.
So what would occur is, if the city elects to sell this property, we would initiate a easement that would accommodate both the channel, the adjacent channel. So it allow for an access easement to maintain that, continue to maintain that channel. It also would provide a pedestrian access easement to allow the adjacent property owner to access their property, which they're currently doing now.
They're currently also parking on this lot. Is that, would there be a parking easement as well?
Yeah, so as part of the easement, the parking easement, there would also be a parking easement. So basically what we would do is have a large area of access as a easement that would include both parking, maintenance of the channel, as well as a pedestrian easement.
And finally, the firefighter in me is concerned about the vegetation management on the property. At the end result, who would be responsible for maintaining fire safe codes?
That would be whoever purchases the property.
Whoever purchases the property.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the flood control channel is kind of a misnomer. There's a stream and there's a small stream bed that disappears underneath the street. It's not like the flood control channel, that runs through the center of the canyon. It's an accessory of some kind.
That's correct. And the reason for the access easement, when I'm talking about the channel, there is another very thin parcel that bisects two properties. And that one is more of a control channel. So this would allow us to have access to that small control channel to maintain it.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff?
Yeah, I have a question regarding the zoning. It's currently zoned for open space and public use. So if we sell it, especially to an adjoining property owner, is it going to be rezoned residential or canyon?
It would have to be rezoned, yes.
And is that something the city would do before it sells it, or is that something the buyer would do, or is it part of the sale process?
The city has not made that determination at this point.
Okay.
But the end result of this is that, I mean, we're not likely to see another structure on this property.
That's correct. And if you do see a structure, it's going to be very, very small.
Covered parking for that house above.
Yeah.
Any other questions for staff at this time? All right. I feel like a radio disc jockey. Let's go to the phones. See if there is any public comment at this time. Anybody who would like to call in for public comment. The number is 669-900-9128. Meeting ID 626-232-0232. And the password is 232242. Oscar, do we have any callers?
It does not appear that we have any callers for public comment at this time.
All right. If somebody does call in, if you'd let us know, that'd be great. In the interim, we'll bring this back to the commission for comment. Any comments?
I'll start. I don't see any reason to have any heartburn with this. It seems like the thoughts are well planned out. The property isn't big enough or usable for a park, so it makes sense to sell it to somebody who can maintain it privately and save the city some money. So I don't have any heartburn with it at all.
I think that as long as we maintain the density of the canyon, and it also is to preserve the single family residences, we're not going to put a residence on there. We're going to maintain the density. I would really like to see whoever gets it to begin to maintain the vegetation, because I do have some concerns over how it's being maintained now. I have no problem with adjoining owners having right of way through it to access their property, because we have some people on one side which I think are landlocked except for this property. And if they could actually pour a parking pad and get people off the road and make the access road just even 6 inches wider at that point, I think it would be well received, because the canyon is very crowded and it's impacted, and in the events of emergencies, there's not a lot of room and not a lot of places to go. So I concur with John.
Go ahead, Commissioner Pevsner.
Oh, no, I'm good. I was just trying to think of, as a devil's advocate, some of the liabilities of that the owner might face, even though they're going to be restricted, you know, kind of like that open space we have up in the One Carter area that someone bought for taxes, but it's designated open space, and they keep trying to sell it. I mean, there wasn't really an opportunity for them to do much else with it, but this property is accessible, so I can't think of anything offhand, so I can't really think of any reason to oppose it or not recommend it to the city council. So it sounds like this is as good alternative as any, especially better than leaving it the way it is. That's for sure.
Thank you. I guess my only question is the ambiguity with which staff on whether or not somebody could build a house there, even if it was a small residence. My only thought being that if it goes to market zoned as less than its full potential, would it get less than its full potential of value at market? In other words, if it's zoned open space, it's worth significantly less than if it's something that could be developed, even if it's an 800 square foot house that could be put on there. And so I don't know that that's part of our purview here, or if that's something that the city council should consider, or we can make a recommendation that they consider that before they pass it. But I was just curious about that. Is that something you can address?
I can address that, Vincent. We had so the county has limitations on us selling it. One of the limitations is, as I understand from the county, that when we appraise this property, it has to be appraised for its highest and best use, which in this case is residential. So we couldn't sell, when we appraise it, we can't sell it for its open space value. We have to sell it for its residential value. But I don't know that the value would be that much different than open space, just because, as I understand, there's a lot of trees on the property that are mature trees. So you'd have to cut some mature trees down and pay the mitigation fee as a result. And you couldn't develop in the middle of a property because there's our drainage easement through it. So the development potential is limited. We have to study that more closely, but we know once we do the appraisal.
And my concern has been addressed by the fact that we can't appraise it for less than its full potential. So it sounds like that's already codified as something that'll be handled. So that obviated my concern. So unless there's other questions, then.
Is the whole drainage part of, is going to be preserved? Because that looks like Sierra Madre history, actually. I mean, that goes back a long time. That the spring and that whole runoff that disappears underneath the street, is that going to be part of a preserved area?
That will be part of the easement, and you can't develop over that easement.
Okay, good. It's pretty.
All right. Would anybody like to make a motion?
Sure, I will move approval of resolution number 20-10 with no modifications.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 Passes unanimously. Next, we do move on to amendments to the design review findings, a discussion continued from July 2nd, 2020 meeting of the Planning Commission. Do you have a presentation for us today?
I do have a staff presentation for you, and I put together a short PowerPoint. Let me load that up. Can everybody see the screen?
Not yet.
Not yet. Let me try it one more time.
Vincent, no, Vincent, it's not working. You might want to try the shortcut Alt-F.
What was that, Oscar?
Alt and the letter S.
It did not do anything. I have it loaded up, and maybe I have to relaunch it.
Vincent, can you try one more time, please? I've made some changes to the
Alt and letter X.
S as in Sam.
Say that again.
S as in Sam.
Oh, okay. No, it's not doing that. So let me close it entirely. And I'm gonna have to minimize a few things there and relaunch it. And that should work. So I can't leave it running the whole time. I have to relaunch it. So everybody can see the screen now?
No, I'm not able to see.
Any suggestions, Oscar?
Yes, sir. What happens when you click on the share screen button? Between the chat and the record button towards the bottom.
Yeah, I know. Let me see. Right now, I'm showing like it's being shared. And I have to get out of,
How about if we take a 5-minute break while we work on technical difficulties?
we can do that.
Fantastic. We will take a 5-minute break and reconvene at 8:55.
staff received direction from City Council to amend the design review findings. And the objective at that time was to ensure that the design review findings are fair, objective, code-based, and compliant with state housing law. Let's go to the next one. If you can, okay. I wanted to point out there were two legislative actions that were passed. The first was in 2017, which was Senate Bill 167, the Housing Accountability Act, which was signed into law by Governor Brown. And that particular law limits local jurisdictions' ability to deny or impose additional conditions upon housing developments that meet objective design review standards. The second housing bill was passed more recently in 2019. It's SB 330, the Housing Crisis Act, which requires objective findings for design review. And there are two key points in the state law. The first was the city cannot impose or enforce design standards established after January 2020 that are not objective. And the second component to this, the definition of objective design standards, states that they involve no personal or subjective judgment by a public official and is uniformly verifiable by reference to an external or uniform benchmark or criterion available and knowable by both the development applicant or proponent and the public official before submittal of an application. So that is the definition of objective standard.
Before we go on, can I just ask a question about that? The way I read that is that this has to do with codes that are codified January 2020 or forward. Is that right?
That's correct.
So if we were to establish new design criteria now, it would be subjected to this standard. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
So if we can advance to the next slide. So on December 19th, the two more recent reviews of this design review findings discussion. The first one more recently occurred in December 19, 2019. And at that time, the commission proposed the following comments. First was to give more direction and guidance to applicants in lieu of modifying the code. Second, to develop a guidance document to communicate expectations with code references. Third, to consider establishing design guidelines to make finding 8A more effective. And number 4 was to revise finding 8A to distinguish how we treat additions versus new construction. And at the July 2nd, 2020 meeting, the commission further discussed with staff the proposed amendments to the design review findings. And it was stated at that time that existing finding 8F, sustainable building and landscape practices, especially water saving features, should be omitted, stating that this was already a requirement pursuant to state building code, such as the water efficient landscape ordinance and solar requirement for new construction. And at the time, Commissioner Catalano and Dallas endorsed the direction to simplify the design review findings and to make them more objective. And the matter was continued at that meeting to today. So what I'd like to do now is to go through for discussion each of the 7 findings that are being proposed. The first one is that the proposed project is consistent with the general plan and zoning code. There was no change to that finding. It was in the original. The second is the proposed project will not unreasonably invade the privacy of adjacent properties by creating vantage points that provide views to the interior of adjacent residences or backyards. Number 3, the proposed project will not unreasonably and completely obstruct mountain and basin views from adjacent properties. Number 4, the bulk and mass of the proposed project reflects the scale of the nearest properties surrounding the subject property. And if we advance to the next slide, I'll explain that in a little bit more detail. So what we are proposing is that the properties that you see highlighted in blue around the crosshatch being the subject site, we would look at and analyze the impact of bulk and mass and compatibility to those adjacent properties. And these are different scenarios that could occur as a typical lot, interior lot, a corner lot, one on a cul-de-sac, and another as a flag lot with varied size lots that are surrounding it. And what we were also proposing to do was to include this as an example in our application packet. So the applicants, when they're preparing a document, they'll be able to understand and see what we mean by surrounding the subject property. We'll go to the next one. These are the final three findings. Number 5, the siding, bulk mass, footprint, and orientation of the structure considers and accommodates the unique features of the site's natural topography and retains protected trees pursuant to an arborist's report. Number 6, where applicable, the project incorporates adaptive reuse, preservation, or restoration of the current structure. And number 7, the overall project incorporates design features that are consistent throughout all building elevations. And the alternatives presented before the commission this evening is to advance the design review findings to be more objective and in line with state housing law, and direct staff to prepare a municipal code text amendment and planning commission resolution for a public hearing, or approve the above with modifications, or continue the matter and provide direction to staff. And if staff is recommending approval of the revised findings for design review to be more objective and in line with state housing law, directing staff to prepare a municipal code text amendment and planning commission resolution for consideration at a public hearing. And that will conclude my presentation. I do also have on slide that we could go back and forth to if need be, the existing design review findings.
All right, are there any questions for staff? All right, at this time, we will take public comment for this agendized item. The number to call in is 669-900-9128. Meeting ID is 626-232-0232. The password is 232242. Mr. Delgado, who I have errantly not referred to correctly previously in this meeting, do we have any callers on the line?
You do not have any callers on the line at this time.
All right, thank you. We will go ahead and bring this back for discussion by the commission. Who would like to start?
I'm willing to start. The pressure from the state is to have objective criteria. And as we receive applications, some are much better than others. And I think if we want to have criteria for making decisions on which we can all agree and share, we're going to need to set standards for what is presented to us. I have been a proponent that we use an architect for certain projects. If we want to use the example of what's happening now up at One Carter, we get pretty robust applications that we can peruse. We can go up to the site. There are story poles present. So I think that for every new building, like the one we looked at today for Grove, there should be story poles. And that way, everyone, including members of the community and the Planning Commission, can look at how big and what the massing is. When we only get incomplete drawings, we're hoping that this is what's going on. I think we need to have complete grading plans. When we looked at what happened up on Santa Anita, we have a problem with, that applicant got bounced back and forth because they used a designer, and the grading plan obviously had some problems with it. Unfortunately, we had an architect on the commission that was able to question what was going on. So we needed that. We also needed, what is the planting and landscaping plan? We had another application tonight where the landscaping plan was critical to how the project related to the neighboring, the neighbors. If we look at what we ask for the hillside, we look at sight lines. Tonight for Grove, we had a concern from a neighbor to the south that the building that the applicant wanted to put in was going to obscure sight lines, and that's one of our findings. So how do we establish the information that we can all agree on that is, quote, objective for such decisions? Well, I believe that then we need to really up the request to the applicant to provide us with complete and detailed and accurate information. So if we really want to have an objective discussion, we have to have good information upon which to judge our decisions. So as we move forward, I think that one of the things that we're going to need to do in order to follow through on whatever these criteria are, is that we're going to need a lot more information from our applicants. And the fact that somebody hires a designer that picks up a picture out of a book, and then we're going to make it look like this, and then it shows up and it has 3 laundry rooms. So it's like, well, what's really going on here? I think that we're going to need to set higher standards, and then we're going to need to reject applicants that do not meet those standards for the application itself before we even make our decisions.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on this in general. What Bob said. I think one thing to be clear about is what the requirements of state law are. They're not that we need objective design standards. That's not what it says. It says if we develop any new standards this year, they have to be objective. So our existing design standards, which are subjective, are perfectly legal. So we don't need to change those to meet state law right now. Maybe sometime in the future we will, but for right now, our design review standings, our guidelines and requirements and findings are perfectly legal under state law. However, the proposed that we're looking at tonight, which would be established after the deadline, and so would need to be objective, are not objective. The findings that we're looking at now are just watered down subjective findings. So let's look at, for instance, number 2. The project will not unreasonably invade the privacy. What does unreasonably invade mean? You can't go measure that with a yardstick. That requires subjective interpretation. The siting, bulk, mass, and footprint and orientation of the structure accommodates the unique features of the site's natural topography. That's not objective. We can't know what that is. The applicant can't read that and know what it is. I looked online at some other cities that have objective standards, and A lot of these go pages and pages to tell you what they are. They talk about, for privacy, they say this part must be set back so many feet. Each window must be so many feet from some other thing. Wall surfaces must be covered with a minimum of 80% of this. This thing must be set back 3 feet from that. That's how objective standards can work. And if we want to do objective standards, this isn't going to cut it at all. This is maybe a starting for the kind of concepts we want. But if we're going to start saying things like the bulk and mass of the proposed project reflects the scale of the nearest property surrounding the subject project, then we're going to need a full code section that talks about how you measure FAR based on nearby properties, the same way we do the setbacks that are over 25 feet when we do yard averaging. You remember we went through and we developed that whole process for the conforming setbacks on a block. And so we need to do that just for that finding. So I think we're sort of mixing up what we're after here, and we should decide first what our goal is. And I don't, at least the stated goals that have been set, I don't see how the findings that are before us get us there, because what we're doing is establishing subjective findings that are not going to be enforceable under state law, and we're going to be throwing out our subjective standards that are enforceable under state law. Doesn't seem like a winning way to do it to me. So if we want to go objective, we need to get fully objective standards that detail everything we want, and that's going to be a long process to figure that out. And keep in mind, our whole code is based on these subjective findings, curing ills. And if you remember, our code is not very robust compared to a lot of other cities. And one of the ways we've dealt with that is, well, we'll just sort of do ad hoc review. We'll look at projects, especially big projects, and we'll see what does it mean to have things like, fits with the land. Well, we'll take a look at it. And so if we're not going to do that kind of ad hoc review, and we're not going to have that subjective cap, we need to do a lot more measures, objective measures, on how we're going to define each project if we want to go down that road. Otherwise, what we're doing is just writing a blank check for people to build whatever they want.
Commissioner Hutt, if I could add one point to what you said earlier. I don't know that terms like reasonableness are necessarily subjective. When we looked into it, the reasonable person standard under the law is an objective standard. I agree that what you're proposing is the safest possible option we can have. Like if you're going to say a certain number of feet away from the property determines what privacy is, that definitely is superior to what we're proposing here. But I don't know that, I wouldn't agree that a term like unreasonably invade the privacy of is necessarily subjective. So I think it's something we can contemplate. It's within, I think it's within what's acceptable under the law. But I agree with you that the more detailed it gets, the more protection we have under the law.
Well, I think the issue with the legality of what's considered objective and what's not is, if you look back under existing case law, you sort of can come to one conclusion that would allow you to say things like a reasonable determination could be, because there's a realm of reasonableness that's objective. But then if you look at the way it's defined in SB 330, it says uniformly verifiable by reference to an external and uniform benchmark that's knowable both by the development applicant or proponent and the public official before the submittal of the application. I mean, I think this is really taking it to a new standard of what is objective. And, I don't have any desire to be the test case for new standards that, to me, really read subjectively. I think if we do want to go the objective route also, I don't want to throw out our existing subjective findings because we can never get those back. So I would much rather say, okay, we have this subjective route. If an applicant wants to choose it, they can, but we could also adopt an alternate route, which is the objective standards, and we could build those out, and then an applicant can go down those. We can see how they work. People can build projects, and we can go, oh, that works great. A lot quicker, a lot better, just as good a product. And then we're all happy. Or, oh my God, this is a big mistake. Let's throw this out, and we can go back to our subjective standards. Or maybe there's an applicant who wants to do something weird, wants to make a sheet metal barn that's unique and different, and a lot of people don't like, but it doesn't fit the objective standards. Well, then they could go through our subjective method and try it out. But if we throw out our current standards, we're not getting those back. And to me, it looks like what we're doing is we're taking our standards that we looked at a lot of time to work on, and we're replacing them with watered down standards that are going to be really hard for us to do anything other than approve. I mean, every project that comes through, unless it's glaring error, and I guess, you know, that's something, because we don't want to approve projects that have glaring error, but it's not going to, these don't provide guidance to anybody. Certainly they provide even less guidance than the standards we have now. So I think if we want to go the objective route, we need to be a lot more clear. We need to say things about the mass of the second floor compared to the first floor. We have to have a calculation for that. You know, the amount of setback that the garage needs to be from the face of the building. You know, it shall be at least 3 feet. Unless if it's 1 car garage, and 6 feet if it's 2 car or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of cities, and you can search through the web and see these that have these long laundry lists of ways that they've sort of designed buildings by objective standards, and we can do that if we want. But we're not doing that now. The standards that are proposed tonight are not doing that, and I think we need to step back a second and say, what do we want to do? What's our real concern here? And then what's the best way to accommodate it? And if the concern is there's some problems with the way some of these standards are now or how they're being interpreted, maybe there's some minor tweaks we can do. If we want to have a fully objective path, then maybe we build an alternate path. Also keep in mind that these findings apply beyond just residential. And so, you know, on the commercial code that we're working on, you know, we're going to have these findings. On bigger projects, we have these findings, and we don't want to throw those out just because of this. So, yeah, I'm sort of at the beginning of the project, not talking about finding number 4 or something in the weeds, just why we're even doing this and what our fundamental goal is, and that's where I'm at a loss.
Well, we're here to take ideas and hear. Okay. Anybody else have any comments?
You're on mute, Bill.
Sorry. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, John said made a long speech about what I was thinking. I was looking at 2 and 3 on our the new proposed standards, and that was my thought exactly. It's almost like I'll give an analogy. I went to one of George Carlin's last comedy routines, and he took the 10 Commandments and he tried to run it. He tried to reduce it down to basically two 1 or 2 thoughts, and he came up with the same thing. Of course, in a comedic fashion, but I sort of commiserate with John. I feel like I don't want to give up our subjectivity, because I think we've actually made more progress and done better with analyzing designs by keeping our subjectivity and getting it right, rather than trying to develop too many objective or go this route and give up our subjectivity. So it's a matter of, let's not give up what we already have. And in a shorter version of what he said, I agree. I think we should maybe even just keep what we have, because by changing it at all, we lose our ability to put our thumb up and do what we've done in the past to get things right and get better designs out of projects. When if there's mechanical standards and we have something unforeseen and someone's just taking a measuring tape to it, then, you know, we're going to be sitting there rubber stamping things and people are going to be asking, how in the heck did we ever make that decision? And, it will be taken from our hands.
Thank you. I think that at our last meeting and earlier in this meeting, I reiterated my concern about the idea of changing the code at this time because it subjects us to this new standard that we're not subjected to today. I understand that it would be great if we could have more objectivity in the code. I think tonight's project was a great example. Most houses, we expect to only have the second story to have 80, 75, 60% of the volume of the first story so that it's articulated and the massing is stepped. It would be great if we had a standard like that. And I'm all for working towards that. I have great concern about giving up what we have today and losing that for the wrong iteration of the next code. And so while I am absolutely for being able to objectify the code, I don't feel that the code that we have before us is one that properly or even remotely objectifies it more than the code we have today. And therefore the risk of having the new code subject us to the new standards is not worth the reward today, in my opinion.
I agree. I think the one thing that the Planning Commission gets to do is to enter in, I mean, we don't, face it, we don't reject a lot of projects. And it seems like when we do reject the projects, the city council overrules us anyway. But what we do is we end up in a process of negotiation where we offer concepts and work with the applicant to get a better version that will fit in our community. I still think that we need more information from the applicant. I'm not comfortable with a lot of these designers that, you know, come up with a drawing, but no context for where the project is going to fit in the community. So, I mean, I'll pose a question to the city attorney. You probably attend a lot of planning commission meetings, and we may be very different from others that you see, but the ones that I've looked at have been fairly antagonistic in terms of their relationship with applicants, whereas we try to at least come back and forth so we come to a middle ground. And I would point out to the two that we worked on tonight, we got a better product for the city of Sierra Madre than if we had been out there with a measuring tape.
Yeah, I don't know that other cities are more antagonistic, but I do think that in the city of Sierra Madre, we're very thorough. And I think that's by virtue of the fact of how experienced all the planning commissioners are. And beside their professional experience, a lot of the planning commissioners have a lot of experience on the planning commission because they have a lot of projects they've seen. I guess one of the things staff wants is, if we're not going to accept these standards as proposed, staff would like some direction regarding, does the planning commission want to propose its own standards? Do we want to go through the guidelines, or is the planning commission completely rejecting the idea of amending these design guidelines?
Aren't we past the deadline for that? Wasn't that for January 2020? After that, we have to be more restrictive?
No. So as Commissioner Hutt stated, under state law, we are not required. There's no set requirement forcing us to change our design review standards. That's not the state law. But state law is pushing cities, like the general theme of state law is they want to encourage more objective design standards. I suspect at some point in the future, if enough developers protest, we're going to have a law that comes up that requires all cities to switch to some kind of objective standard, as probably defined by SB 330. But we're not there yet. But I know that it's council's desire to see more objective standards. And so I'm curious to know what the Planning Commission, how the Planning Commission would like to proceed at this point. Because it's okay that we don't accept these standards, but we should, if the Planning Commission wants, we can proceed in some other direction.
You know, I think that one thing that we might want to just take a little detour on is the whole concept of the massing of the second floor. And Tom brought that up. And Tom, you weren't on the commission when these findings were adopted, but we had a really big discussion about the second floor and whether we should limit the size of the second floor in relation to the first floor, and whether there should be a requirement that we would do a full design review permit for a second floor. And there was all sorts of going around. And where we left it was that, you know, if you do any addition to a second floor, it has to have a full design review. And we didn't want to require that a certain amount of the massing of the second floor be smaller than the first, because there are traditional architectural themes that have the same size, and we wanted to allow that flexibility. So, you know, I think as a perfect example of the fact that our whole concept was really based on this ad hoc and subjective review. You know, I don't really have a problem switching to an objective, a fully objective, or a more objective, or having an alternate path that's more objective. I just think we can't throw out our subjective review process and do nothing else, because if we do that, we're going to have serious problems. We're going to leave a glaring hole in our code. The other thing is we have a pretty low bar as to when people have to come for a design review permit, and before the full planning commission, right? But if we make that process fully objective or close to objective, and we take away finding 8, which has a higher bar for bigger houses, what we're going to end up doing is pushing development towards big, because there's no differentiation. And so, you know, maybe if we want to streamline a little bit, we leave the findings the way they are with regard to the big projects, and we perhaps change the thresholds with regard to renovations, small additions. Maybe there's an ability to do some renovation on the second floor if you're adding less than 500 feet, or the massing is less than X% of the bottom, where it could just be a staff level review. And that might help facilitate a lot of the unction, where I think you do get projects that come through that sort of in your gut, you say, you know, this project doesn't really need to come to the planning commission. This isn't the kind of thing where we need this full-blown review. This should have just been handled administratively. So, you know, I think where some of this is coming from is there's some concern about those kind of projects, and maybe that's a way to address it. But I think for when you're doing a full-blown new house, and you look at what we've done up on 1 Carter, if we have the standards that are being proposed tonight for 1 Carter, and that would be, say, for the monastery property, those houses aren't going to look anywhere near as good as the ones that we've approved for 1 Carter. So I think that I'm totally against the concept of throwing out our existing findings when we know we can't get them back. So I would be okay with evaluating the concept of changing some of the thresholds and building in some alternatives and more objective standards that smaller additions, smaller houses could get processed administratively and not rise to the level of having to come to the planning commission, or contemplate the sort of a, like I said, a parallel channel that's objective that even a bigger house could meet. But if we do that, then we really need to develop a fulsome set of objective criteria, and search the web for other cities that do this. They're long and they're detailed, and I don't think having things that are basically just a watered down version of our existing findings are going to cut it, because I think I really doubt they're very enforceable under the new law, and they don't give applicant the direction that I think is the big issue that we've been looking for, is that we want to be able to give applicant more clarity and more direction.
And your point about the work that was done by previous commissions is well taken, and thank you for bringing that up. We have seen houses come before us where it's the exact same size on top as it is on bottom. It was an existing house and they were just closing in the side, right? And we thought that was a great project. So you're right that there are projects that would be completely eliminated if we had these completely objective codes that were based on strictly percentages or strictly something. So it sounds like what I'm hearing is that nobody's really in favor of changing the code to this particular version. And so I guess the question that we need to answer is how best to approach this. If I'm hearing staff correctly, the direction from the council is that they would like us to make this more objective. I think that in protection of the process and the protections that we have here, we're not comfortable doing that with what was suggested. So do we want, what's the path forward that we should take? Thoughts?
So the path forward would be to make a recommendation that you still want to consider perhaps developing and revisiting our thresholds for design review in terms of size of properties and what triggers design review, what is handled ministerially. And we can also look at the findings and modify the existing findings that we have for larger projects. That would be.
And also our standards for the applicant, because I think if we have more information, it becomes more objective.
I guess my only question with the idea of changing the standards or the thresholds at which these standards apply would be whether that change triggers the objectivity of 2020 forward or not. In other words, if we say any house that is proposing that is under 2,500 square feet finished and is proposing less than a 500 square foot addition, or whatever the code is, hypothetically speaking, would then be a ministerial approval rather than coming before the commission, are we then putting in jeopardy the part that we're not changing?
I can research that issue. The way I'm reading it now, it says, imposing or enforcing design standards established on or after January 1st, 2020 that are not objective design standards. The standards to me are the individual elements that have to be satisfied. So I would think changing the thresholds wouldn't trigger SB 330's objectivity requirement, I would think. But I would like from the commission some kind of consensus regarding what Commissioner Hutt had proposed. I think Commissioner Hutt, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you proposed possibly A, lowering the thresholds like we're talking about, B, having a separate track, having a separate, developing a separate objective track for certain projects. I don't know that there was a C. I think it was just those two. Is that correct?
Well, I suppose C would be some combination of those. I mean, we could have a fully parallel track where you could do any project under objective standards, or we could just have, or I suppose we could have some sort of carve out a track of smaller additions or projects that would be subject to objective standards. And I think that it may be easier for us to take those in smaller bites and say, let's look at the thresholds, and let's say, I mean, to me, the big threshold that's an issue is the second story, and say, okay, instead of every second story, no matter how small the addition, coming in front of the Planning Commission for a full design review approval, will allow, you know, if it meets X, Y, and Z criteria, and we can work on that, you know, less than so many % of the bottom floor, less than 500 feet. I don't know how we slice and dice that, but those could be processed ministerially, and then, you know, maybe we could work on. But I think this is going to take a lot longer time, a long and fulsome list of objective standards, and we can see if we think that makes sense as having a full parallel track.
My sense is that a full set of objective criteria is a job for a contractor who will work with us for a year to do all the what ifs and to look at what we do in Sierra Madre. I mean, I think that if we ask staff to do that, we won't see them again until, you know, spring, because it's going to be it's a tough deal. So I have no problem with us going down that road, because it sounds like the hint from the city attorney is that we could wake up one day and that will be the new law of the state, and starting some kind of process with that may, you know, be helpful. But I'm not. Before we adopt this, I think we really need to do a thorough look at, well, what would that mean, and how would that be applied, and what would be the process? Because it's going to be, I think it's going to be very contentious. I think there's going to be a lot more people out there with measuring tapes, and, you know, well, I don't like this kind of light fixture because it's too bright here and not bright enough there, and, you know, that gets into. I think that becomes petty at some point. And when I've looked at other planning commissions, so I've looked around at other planning commissions, that's part of what I thought. I didn't think that there was some effort to make the best project for the city. It was more like a tennis match between the applicant and the city.
Yeah, I'm not for giving up any of our existing rights. I think some of this legislation is for other places, and as small as we are, I don't want to give up any of the quality ability to make quality projects in town. And until they force our hand, then I would just say leave as much as in place as possible. I would consider some threshold issues only, and I'm not even sure I kind of would want to even endeavor to go down some objective parallel track, because what may end up happening is people will just take that track if it becomes an easier road to getting what they want, and not having to go through us. That's not to say that I want to make every project difficult, because I think the city's council's objective is to make it so there isn't as many things that have to go through design review. But we accomplished that with the canyon zone. We had, you know, lots that were, you know, just everything basically had to come before the planning commission, and we fixed the code so that so the canyon zone has a lot more that could just be done over the counter. I think that was a big success, and I'd rather just not give up what we already have, since we've already been given this, you know, we're already past January 2020, and I suspect that, you know, if they're going to force our hand, like with the ADUs, they're going to force our hand. But I think until then, we're a small enough city, and unless that becomes a bigger issue with other municipalities, I think we can live with what we got and still have successful development in our town.
I guess what I seem to be hearing, and I'll say this back so that I can make sure that I'm hearing it correctly from everybody. We are not prepared as a commission today to change the existing standards such that they would be subject to the objective standards that are post January of 2020. And so we seem to think that going to a completely objective code or a much more objective code, including an alternate path of objectivity, is likely a bigger undertaking than can be done well by us at this time. And that the middle ground that we can likely get some commission consensus around seems to be looking at some thresholds at which we make the review process ministerial versus coming before us, a great example being the second story. Does that sound like where we've kind of landed as a commission, gentlemen?
That's what it sounds like. And I would just like to point out, if you recall, when we began this discussion last year, staff did bring forward some suggestions for modifying the design review thresholds. And we could bring that back for your consideration as a starting point.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think that I think one of the lessons that I've taken away from, we do our best work when we work incrementally. And so we look at a sort of individual problem, figure out how it can work, fix that issue, get it done, and move on. And the problem we've had as a city, and I don't mean the city government, I mean the whole town, is that when we try to do big stuff, sometimes we bite off more than we can chew, we get stuck in a morass, and we don't get things done. And so, you know, I think that exploring the concepts of a full objective set of standards and maybe paralleling, tracking those is a worthwhile endeavor. But I don't know that now's really the time to do it. And I think we could do some incremental changes with the thresholds and some standards incorporated with those thresholds that could really streamline the process and get us a lot of the benefits that we're looking for without doing the fulsome overhaul. The other thing is, you know, we've undertaken a fulsome overhaul of the commercial code, and that's still outstanding. And I would much rather get that done and finished and adopted and implemented before we undertake another giant project that could take a long, long time. And I think sometimes our eyes get big and we try to do too much all at the same time, and then we don't actually produce. And so let's take pieces that we can chew and get them done. I really think that will produce better results for the town in the long run.
Mayor Capocha, did you want to comment?
All in favor of making some progress, so I don't think what Mr. Hutt has proposed is unreasonable. I think that's a good start, and maybe something you can do, you might have alluded to that already, is like for a second story, if the second story is going to be beyond X percentage of the first floor, that would trigger the design review for now. But I'd like to see that you guys see what you can do to make it a little bit easier for projects that are not major. You know, if somebody wants to build a 4,000 square foot house, okay, you know, we can live with that. I don't want those done ministerially, but there's just too many projects, I think, and too many cases where people avoid building the second story house simply because they don't want to go through the design review. And so if you can find a way to make those a little easier to go through with, I think that's a good start. And Alex, I'd like to talk to you a little bit more at some point. I don't want to do it now, but I want to understand with a little bit more detail what this means. I think if what I heard you say was, if we were to say add a new criteria in there, standard, then that would be subject to the objective standard that's listed here. Does that mean we can't change one? So maybe those are some things that you can think about. So I think we need to be very clear on what that means, what you can and can't do that triggers you into this totally objective realm here. So, yes, so we can talk about that again, but meantime, you could look at that and, we could have a conversation about that. And I'll think a little bit more about this, but at least let's get started with what Mr. Hutt suggested and just see if we can find a way to change the threshold a little bit so that more projects are not subject to the design review. And I thought it interesting just listening to the discussion tonight in the presentation on the metal roof, how, 2 projects on Grandview did not go through this, and they're different. And I'm sure a lot of people object to the style and, the different aspects of those. But as somebody pointed out, Sierra Madre is very diverse. So now, because this fella has a 2-story house, he goes through this process, and fortunately it wasn't too painful, I don't think. But it just seems like kind of an arbitrary thing if you're crossing into a 2nd story, that all of a sudden you're subjected to this when, in my mind, it's not really a big deal building a 2-story house on a block that has a bunch of other 2-story houses, especially right next to a house that has 2-story. And the other problem that I see too is the issue with blocking somebody's view. I mean, I've been around long enough where all this stuff was implemented and the general plan was approved under my watch here as a council person. But at the time, we're not really thinking too much about what some of the implications of these things are. And that is incredibly hard to deal with, how much of somebody's view you're blocking and what is okay and what isn't. So, these are really tough questions. So let's make some progress where we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Capocha. So it sounds like where we've arrived at is that we want to revisit, or we want to visit looking at some of the levels or the thresholds at which something comes before the commission versus what it will be ministerially. And so I guess the question becomes, is this something that we want staff to bring back some of the ideas that they had previously, or is this something that we want to form a subcommittee to investigate?
I think a couple points. One is that I don't think that necessarily the choice is full planning commission review or ministerial. There's an in-between land of a minor design review or administrative design review, I forget the name of it, where it still incorporates some of the subjective stuff, but it's staff level, so it's a lot easier, a lot smoother for the applicant. So I think we really have 3 levels. That's important to keep in mind. The second thing is that I think as part of the establishing some of the thresholds, I think we can get some more comfort in lowering some of the thresholds if we build in some objective criteria around those lowered thresholds. So, we talked again about the 2nd story, but if it's less than a certain percentage of the top or the room addition is less than 500 feet or something like that, that it's not going to be a loophole that's going to be exploited and cause lots of problems. I think maybe from my perspective, it makes sense for staff to bring this back as a discussion item. We can look at it and see how close we are and either form a subcommittee at that point if we think it needs a lot of work, or if we're pretty close, just tweak it on the fly and move it along. But I think a subcommittee now without a little bit more discussion of how those thresholds play would be sending off a subcommittee without enough direction.
Great. I'm all in favor of that.
I agree.
Great. Commissioner Penzner? Okay, great.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Perfect.
Chair Dennison, if just so staff has enough direction, because it'd be a shame if we came back and we didn't have what you were looking for, and then we'd have to go back again and redo it. Does the commission have any suggestions as to what thresholds we should be looking at altering? So I think I heard 2nd story, so we have that written down. Are there any other thresholds the commission is considering altering that we can go back and take a look at and bring to you present to you at the next meeting.
I would like to hear from staff because staff sees more applications than we do. We only see them after they fall over that magic line and we have to deal with them. But there's a lot of others in that gray area that I think that staff could say, well, we could make a decision on this. You know, I'd like to hear some recommendations from staff on what cards to pick.
Yeah, that's a great point. One of the insights we lack is if candidates say, well, you know, I really only wanted 2,750, 2,500 was the limit. So, you know, I'm going to go 2,499. Right? And so if because staff deals with that and Commissioner Spears' point, it's past that when we see it. So I think getting that insight from staff would be really valuable. But it's a good question as far as if there were any other standards besides second stories that we think need to be revisited. I don't have any that come to my mind, and so if staff has some, I think that'd be great guidance from real world experience.
I'll discuss it with my staff, and we'll come up with some typical scenarios. One of the issues that does take up a lot of staff time is dealing with projects that are not designed by architects. So we end up doing a lot of hand-holding.
I doubt you'll get much resistance from specifically Commissioner Spears or many others on the commission if there were a threshold at which above you need or requires an architectural design versus a design. I think there's a minimum at which a designer's view of how we add 500 feet to a house is completely sufficient, right? I don't want to make it hard for people to add or fix something on their house, right? We definitely want to make it conducive to that. So I think that if you had a criteria at which you recommend that triggering, that'd be something that would be easier for us to consider.
You know, but lately we've seen some entire house, you know, redo, scrape the lot and build something new, and we've had to bounce it back and forth because the application was incomplete and the person had no sense of thoroughness in terms of what the design was in relationship to all the other houses around it. Whereas we get packages for number 1 Carter, and we can do a lot with them very quickly. So it's kind of ironic that we have you know, hillside development, which requires a great deal of work that can go faster than some things in town. So I'd like to push for higher standards because I think we will get better products, but also we will save staff time. I mean, the city is paying a lot of money right now to staff to handhold and carry these people through, and you know, I'd rather have them do other things.
Well, so I guess my question on that is whether that's something, I don't think that the commission dictates what it takes to turn in a package for review. It seems to me that that's performed at the staff level. So isn't staff already empowered to set that standard for what the submission package is?
Well, no, that's driven by code. I mean, that's part of what we looked at when we set the criteria before. And I think that it, you know, for me, requiring architect review for projects that require finding 8 is a no-brainer. I think to the extent that we raise the bar and make it so that fewer houses would require a full planning commission review on a design review permit, I mean, maybe that's the standard, that anything that needs a full design review permit needs to be designed by an architect. But I think that's something we should think about while we look at the thresholds. Because there's certainly, I think we found that the bigger the house, the more the design the challenge. especially the bigger in relation to the property. And so, certainly at the high end, I think we need an architect. But we should find that happy middle ground and try to implement that. And we should, at a minimum, require it for finding 8 and see how that works, and maybe even for a full design review permit. One other thing that has come up to us before where we've had to do design review permits that seemed egregious is when people are adding square footage, but also taking away square footage. And one of the things, the way we've interpreted that before is you just count the new square footage, and so that like triggers you into doing this full review. But if somebody is sort of rearranging square footage and either keeping the size the same or reducing the square footage or only increasing it by a little bit, and they're not changing the front facade of the house, that doesn't seem to require a design review permit to me. I mean, that's something that I think could be handled at staff level. And I think there was, maybe it was the Wisteria house that had this kind of
The
issue.
Wisteria house that they framed in a side and took it off the other.
Yeah, and that's one of the ones where, it came to us and it just sort of struck me as like, this seems overkill. And I think that, small additions, obviously second units are outside of our review now because of state law. Anything where they're adding only a very small amount or netting out a small amount, those kind of things I think we could reduce to an administrative review.
Yeah, and I know I'm a broken record on this. We have many, many houses that are going to be hitting the thresholds of 75 years old that we should allow them to update without coming before us. So we should contemplate, I mean, all the houses from the 50s are going to be 75 in 5 years. So let's think about if that's something that we want to look at changing that as well when we visit this.
Well, I think we already addressed that to a certain extent by having the sort of preliminary review, which is a lot less costly, and that can allow people who have houses that are quite clearly not historic to move forward on stuff. But to the extent we want to, I mean, maybe it would be useful to hear from staff on how that project, on how that interpretation is going, and if we need further revision in that area. Because I agree that was a huge problem, and I think we've addressed it, but it would be good to hear if we feel like we have more work to do in that area.
No, I think it's working very well now. The trigger for a historic resource evaluation. I think we're getting very consistent documents now that we're contracted with our sole source contract. And the cost has certainly come down from what was previously charged to residents.
All right, is that clear guidance as to what we're looking for from staff on our next revisit of this?
Yes.
Great. All right. I assume we need a motion.
I've got one question on that. Did we want to look at the thresholds just in R1, or do we want to look at those? I know that one of the issues is in Canyon, we never compared the thresholds to R1. Maybe it makes sense to sort of look Hillside, Canyon, and R1. I think we've looked at R3 quite recently, so I think we're good on that. But we might want to compare across the single family zonings.
Yes, we can bring that back.
Great. Anything else on this before we move on? All right, great. Planning Commission reports.
Nothing.
All right, Planning and Community Preservation staff reports.
So our next meeting is on August 6th. I I was hoping to come back with commercial and parking code revisions for commission consideration. And if that's not going to be ready, then we could at least have the introductory discussion regarding the thresholds for design review across the residential zoning districts.
Vincent, when do you need the commercial materials in order to get them on the agenda?
So they would actually have to go out next week.
On Thursday?
Yes.
Okay. I sent you the revised parking code. Let me know if you have any comments on that, and I can ship you by Monday some more stuff on the commercial to try to unify it, and then we can talk and see if that gets us to a point where you feel like we have enough to bring back to the meeting.
Okay, we'll do that.
Director Gonzalez, next week is the 23rd. I think there's an extra week in there.
Yeah, there would be 2 weeks.
The 30th in order to be for the 6th?
Yes.
So you actually have 2 weeks, John.
Yes, we do.
Okay, that's great. Well, then I think we definitely can get something for the commercial code on the August one then.
Great.
That concludes my comments.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you to all of staff for their presentations tonight. And hearing no other business, I will adjourn the meeting to our next meeting on August 6th. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you. Good night.